This 135-page document has 67 recommendations on how the UK Armed Forces can improve the offer and incentives for its personnel. Are there any good ones? Hey everyone, and welcome to The Savvy Squaddy. In this video I'm going to share my thoughts on a number of the recommendations that were made in the recently released Haythornthwaite review. Firstly, thank you to one of my viewers who highlighted this for me. I am a team of one at the moment, and things do go under my radar, and I'm always thankful when people reach out and support me in any way they can. This will also be a long video with not many visuals, so feel free to listen to it whilst taking a shit. Right, so what is the Haythornthwaite review? F me, that is a mouthful. It is an independent review carried out by this guy, Rick Haythornthwaite, that looks at how the armed forces manage, reward and incentivize their people. The last one of its kind to happen was in 1995 by Michael Bett, and a lot has changed since then. The aim of this review is to update and improve the financial and non-financial aspects of the offer to military personnel, aligning them with the expected changes and operations of the armed forces in the future. The suggested recommendations set out to attract, retain, reward and motivate military personnel, and ensuring that the armed forces continues to be an appealing choice for the next generation. As I said at the start, there are around 135 pages and 67 recommendations. I will only be covering a handful of them and will share my thoughts, but also to shed some light on this review, as I know most of you haven't heard of it or won't read it. I'm going to be quoting the shit out of this review, which will probably make up over 75% of my script, but I agree with most of what it says and they say it better than I could, so there's no point trying to reinvent the wheel here. Anyway, for my first example of blatant plagiarism, Chapter 1 is all about making people feel valued through a people-led approach. The landscape for reward and incentivization is overcomplicated, a result of attempts to write rules for every situation, sometimes literally running to thousands of pages. So many rules inevitably mean it can at times appear contradictory and geared towards the needs of the organisation rather than the individual. Our conversations with service personnel throughout this review have suggested that the package is poorly understood, difficult to access, disempowering, and perceived to be of poor standard at the point of delivery. Every leader we have talked to cares about their people and wants to give them the best support they can, but the system all too often frustrates them. The policy that surrounds the entire offer needs to be simplified, communicated clearly, and made more accessible so personnel can better understand what is available, what options/choices they have, and how they can access the elements specific to their needs. The deal must be explicit so that expectations are clearly set and it is evident when they are not being met. I mean, I'm sure we all agree with these statements. If it was so simple and communicated much clearer, then there wouldn't be a need for someone like me and this channel. My sheer existence is evidence of these statements. The first step must be clarity over what is really being offered. Personnel need a clearer understanding of the offerings, values and culture of the armed forces, but so does the organisation. This will be best achieved by moving away from using the phrase "the offer" entirely. It is poorly defined and means different things to different people. The armed forces should instead move to a specifically defined People Value Proposition (PVP), applying best practice from the well-established practice of employee value propositions in the private sector. It's funny, a lot of people always mention the offer, but nowhere can I find a definitive answer to what the offer actually is and what it encompasses. Now there is of course an offer, but its meaning has been lost and has not been communicated well at all by the armed forces, and I think they've missed a trick here. Because while yes, it's not as good as it once was, it is still much better than what other jobs out there offer. But people don't know this because it's not widely publicised. The People Value Proposition defines all elements across compensation, benefits, training, career and culture from the perspective of the individual employee, what they will be given, in what circumstances and why, and where they have choice. It describes the total value that the armed forces offer to their people in return for their service and work. It makes a clear promise so that expectations are mutually agreed and against which each side can be held to account. It must be a statement of how the service of the individual connects to the values held and reward offered by their service. I've said it multiple times before in previous videos. Time is our most valuable asset. We cannot get it back. we provide this valuable assets to organisations so they can further their mission, and in return they compensate us for the value we have given them. If the compensation is not fully understood by those who have provided the value, then naturally people will be unhappy and leave to find somewhere else where their time is valued more. Certainly in the last couple of years, the MOD has not fully valued the time that those who serve have sacrificed. We need not look any further than the Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey 2023, in which pretty much every metric is the lowest it has been in over a decade. The AFCAS survey, as well as this independent review, should hopefully highlight to the MOD that if changes are not made, and made fast, then recruitment will continue to lag behind the replacement rate. So, here are the first two recommendations that they suggest. Recommendation 1. Create a new people value proposition, taking the opportunity to review and redefine the elements to create a unique, relevant and compelling offering. And recommendation 2, it must be much more than just another publication on the intranet. It must be in plain English and honestly explain expectations, not operate in platitudes. Now for those of you like me who did not know the meaning of platitudes, here it is. Moving on. There has been much focus on the recent headline-grabbing examples of poor performance across housing and food service. These are fundamental needs for personnel and their families. Once the Armed Forces has decided it will step in to meet those needs, and in many circumstances it must, a failure to meet their expectation is, not unreasonably, seen as a breach of trust. Many of the current challenges are as a direct result of chronic underinvestment exacerbated by narrow, siloed decision-making that ignores their critical role in the overall people system and has disempowered local commanders. I don't think I need to say much on this. I live in SFA and have had some issues, especially since the new contract came in. We all thought it couldn't get much worse than Amy, but somehow it did. In my personal experience, it has improved over the last few months, but it's not there yet. And I have heard some horror stories which make the issues I have had seem like a minor inconvenience. It is an area that is underinvested and something that hugely affects not just the serving person, but also their family. Recommendation 3 suggests the nascent plans to invest in single living and service families accommodation to replace and upgrade the current stock should be prioritised. This includes service plans for £1.5 billion of investment in the former, and the Defence Infrastructure Organisation's plan for £2 billion additional investment in the latter. So the recommendation is there, we will have to see what the outcome is. Now, this is not specifically one of the 67 recommendations that was made, but it did make me chuckle a little bit. There are good reasons why a mess is important in service culture, but there is also a place for more modern concepts, like a military Deliveroo alongside it. I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but my mind just pictured it as an extra duty where some guy in kit is cycling around camp delivering food to everyone with a bright blue box strapped to his back and getting spoken to like a dick when someone's order isn't right. I'm not saying this concept is a bad idea, it's just something I never would have thought of or would see. What do you think? Should there be an internal Deliveroo on camp? Could be called Rapid Rations or some such. Don't go stealing my name now, I'm gonna trademark that shit. However, did you know this next bit? I didn't, and I wonder how many commanders know about it. The current Future Defence Infrastructure Services contract for accommodation maintenance has provisions built in which allow local commanders to spend up to £25,000 to target local issues without the need to seek prior approval. Trust with consequences. Unfortunately, despite making far more financially consequential decisions elsewhere, financial process controls prevent them from using the full delegation. I can't say I'm shocked, to be honest. The bureaucracy in the military is demotivating for sure, but perhaps recommendation 6 can help. It suggests to uplift a new contractual trust with consequence limit to £100,000 within all top-level budgets and remove all bureaucratic barriers to its use. Set a target that every authorised commander should use this mechanism this financial year. That does seem like it could be a quick win, which could help commanders out quite a bit when issues arise. It would allow them to hire out a plumber or an electrician, perhaps, when something in the block breaks and Pinnacle says it's a 2-week wait. Next up might put a smile on those in long-term relationships or LTRs. We also endorse work to consider the opening of entitlement rules to long-term unmarried partners across the people value proposition. The current system will only become even more out of line with future recruits' expectations over time, becoming a significant drag on the attractiveness of joining or staying in the armed forces. So, recommendation numero 10 suggests expand the PVP to recognise long-term partners, personnel with a substantial mutual commitment in line with the findings from the Armed Forces Family Strategy Review, as part of a balanced total reward approach. Around half of regular personnel are estimated to be married or in a civil partnership, with a further 25% reporting they are in a long-term relationship. Until recently, the Armed Forces only recognised the latter for the purposes of financial reward and support. This is anecdotally reported to be the major reason why service personnel are more likely to be married than the general population, especially those under 30, given it gives access to heavily subsidised service families accommodation. And I agree, I would be lying if I said that this was not one of the reasons I got married. I always intended on doing so, but transferring to a new trade that moves around a lot brought that decision forward. This change, if implemented, would benefit a lot of people who just don't want to get married in life. Those of us living in SFA should realise how cheap we actually get housing for. I pay less than 25% of the civilian rate for my rent, a huge saving which my civvy neighbours don't receive. But in case you don't realise how much you are saving, then recommendation 11 is for you. It says, update the charging mechanism for accommodation to be calculated in terms of a subsidy against the market rate. This should not in itself change the amount charged to personnel, but should provide both the individual and the organisation with a clear understanding of the value of this element of the offer. It should be routinely communicated to everyone, for example, on payslips. Personnel should explicitly see the subsidy they receive if they live in service accommodation. They will then be able to understand more transparently how that offer stacks up against either the subsidy offered in the private rental market or what would happen when they leave the service. I think that this is a great idea and will really help visualise the enormous benefit that subsidised accommodation has on one's disposable income. Next up is the area of allowances, and this shit does need reforming. It is a bureaucratic, complex mess. More time and money is spent by both the individual and the HR staff during an audit to justify why that Tesco meal deal was purchased. Recommendation 14 is a big one, but it states that across all allowances, simplification will be achieved by a radical review of process and policy. This needs to be carried out from a clear philosophical standpoint that assumes trust and simplicity unless there is very clear justification that stands up against the resource burden and incentivization impact. There should also be an aim to minimise or remove all incentivization from allowances. Offers like home to duty and subsistence allowance are currently called allowances, which are designed to compensate for specific costs incurred in the course of duties. This brings with it a lot of complexity and rules, since they must be directly and specifically justified every time against ever more varied circumstances. In reality, these are only offers that have historically been considered because individuals in theory have no choice about where they live. Any other organisation, even one that asks its people to move regularly, would not give a specific commuting and food allowances. They would give a holistic incentivization of mobility. That would be a much clearer approach which gives more agency and transparency while reducing administration. Bloody hell, that was a mouthful. Whilst they are suggesting to scrap home to duty and subsistence allowance and other similar allowances, they do so with the intent to then introduce a much more comprehensive incentive as a whole. If it works, then I could certainly see how the process becomes much clearer and simpler, providing more freedom and transparency for people. This next suggestion would be a huge change if implemented, and it would take a few years to do so. The impact of service on families is one of the factors, often the most important, influencing intentions to leave, especially where they are subject to the compound effect of capricious deployments, inconsiderate actions by a distant employer, and a lack of agency in their lives. The toolkit available to leaders today is inadequate, it is rigid, outmoded, and overly complex. The traditional one-size-fits-all model principally values personnel by quantity rather than quality and output. It has not coped and probably cannot cope with the increase in demand for skills. It also builds cost into the system since almost everyone must get everything, making it increasingly difficult to sustain. So recommendation 15 sets out to change this one-size-fits-all model. It says to create a spectrum of service framework that enables each service to negotiate terms of service with every one of their people. The framework should create a new set of categories that consider engagement type, engagement length, compulsion, mobility, and military training factors. The spectrum of service should be an approach to terms of service for the holistic recruitment, management, retention, and transition of all regular, volunteer, and regular reserved armed forces personnel within a simple, transparent and flexible framework. A framework implemented in this way should provide a structure to enable a discussion between every single service person and their service about how they want to work and the level of control that they want over their lives. This must be a negotiation. The service does not need everyone to be full-time, fully deployable and fully mobile. Using the spectrum of service to meet organisational needs is as important as meeting individual needs. Here is an image to help illustrate what they mean. This is a great concept and I think it could work, but I do have my reservations, because at the moment it clearly feels like, at least within my trade, that there is a need for everyone to be full-time, and I couldn't see much of us getting a choice or coming out on top in that negotiation. However, where I think this framework would shine is the fact that it is a spectrum. There are people in my trade who are not deployable, therefore when deployments come up, it's the same people going and it becomes tiring. If this spectrum came into play, deployable people would be paid more than those who are unable to. I think this would help retention greatly as it more accurately recognises the value that people are able to offer. Currently, it does make you question whether or not you should just be a biff cunt because those fuckers get paid the same but don't have the same level of responsibilities or expectations. This spectrum would recognise that and not reward those fat lazy shits. But it's also good for those who perhaps have just had a child and want to still be full time but not be deployable for a few months so they can help out some more at home. So I definitely think there is some positive utility in this framework. Following on from this, recommendation 16 suggests that today's regular and reserve populations should naturally fall across multiple categories and rapid movement between categories must be obligatory, no more than 30 days. This mixed, flexible categorization should be reflected in a new systemic approach to workforce planning and career management. You can then see from this image how the reward structure could be laid out. Those who do the top level in the characteristics and dimensions of service under the new spectrum will be compensated more than those who are not at those levels, which makes perfect sense in my eyes and would make people feel more valued and incentivize people to stay current and competent. There is a clear need to be able to give different reward packages to different personnel. A total reward approach finds the optimal point where personnel are best supported across all elements of reward, both financial and non-financial, to achieve organisational objectives in a sustainable manner. For the first time, this approach would directly link organisational objectives with specific personnel goals and decide how reward levers should be used. This might be skills-based. Recommendation 18 sets out to define a reward framework that considers whether each of the elements of financial and non-financial reward is optimally aligned to achieve defence objectives. This should reflect desired organisational behaviours in the future operating environment, such as mobility, readiness, and delivery of operational effect both home and away through financial and non-financial incentivization provision, total award. Recommendation 19 then suggests to start with establishing a flexible pay model incorporating an individual's skills-based pay element to reward individual knowledge, skills, experience and behaviours. This would be in addition to command, leadership and management through existing rank and seniority to provide greater recognition of individual value and pay efficiency through more efficient pay targeting. I can really get behind this. When I joined the army, it was into a Challenger 2 regiment. At the time, there was an incentive of extra pay when you completed your commander's course. That was scrapped shortly after I arrived. It's quite a long course and a challenging one. Where the fuck is the incentive to do that now? It really degrades people's value proposition when they see oxygen thieves getting paid the same wage as them for not having the same level of responsibility. A skills-based pay element would help retention and incentivize people to do these courses. In my eyes, it's long overdue. The final recommendation I will mention in this video is number 23. I know, not even halfway through the 67 and I'm already saying that this is the last one I'm mentioning. And that's just because the ones after this I didn't really have much to say, plus this video is getting long enough as it is. Anyway, recommendation 23 says to take a number of steps to increase the value and efficacy of the Armed Forces pension. Create a pension value statement, revive previous work on allowing payments of the early departure payment to be replaced by an alternative in-service payment scheme that will deliver better incentivization effect, examine a pay in lieu of pension scheme and pension recycling, and examine options to reform SCAPE. SCAPE is just a technical formula used to calculate overall pension costs to the MOD. You can see from this image that it made up about 35% of the MOD reward expenditure in the 21-22 financial year. That's about £3.64 billion. There would also be value in developing a model that allows more choice around pensions for junior cohorts. OR2 and OR3s account for 26% of armed forces reward costs. If, as our analysis suggests, they would perform more pay to pension, there could be a win-win improvement in value for money. Got to say, this is a statement I don't fully agree with. OR2s and OR3s are privates and lance corporals, young junior soldiers who, for the most part, don't really think long term. Most of these people don't even understand their pension scheme and don't want to even think about it, as it's so far off into the future for them. It's not even worth a consideration. And this is where they're wrong. Thinking about and planning for your future and retirement at a young age is the best time to do it. You have all those years to benefit from the powers of compounding. Thinking that more money now, in place of a larger pension in 40 years, is such short-sightedness, especially when that money now will most likely just be wasted on mindless consumerism. Instant gratification at its finest. I don't think that is a win-win. I think that is a compromise to appease those who don't actually understand their pension or how important it is to have one. Perhaps a better recommendation would be to properly educate young serving personnel on their pension and the importance of personal finance. But hey, that's just my opinion on it. What do you all think? Leave a comment down below. And the last thing I want to cover is not a recommendation, but something they call returning to honest performance management, which I think most of us would agree is a welcome change, should they do it. We have heard from a worrying number of people that there has been a decline in the quality of personnel advancing to more senior levels, particularly amongst officers. It appears the armed forces are simultaneously losing too many of the people they want to keep and keeping too many of the people they would be better doing without. But tolerating incompetence burdens the entire organisation and makes attempts to improve more difficult. This must be accompanied by a greater focus on addressing underperformance and ultimately allowing those who cannot improve to be more quickly replaced by emerging talent. Do you know what? It's nice to see these points that so many of us have being raised in such a public and important document. From my experience, it's so bloody difficult to kick someone out who is blatantly incompetent. Keeping these laggards in service increases the workload and responsibilities on everyone else. Get rid of them. Keeping them in diminishes the hard work and value that their peers put in for essentially what is the same reward. It's so obviously wrong, and you can see and understand why good, competent people become unmotivated and look elsewhere for opportunities where they will be valued much more. I don't blame them. Not all, but many people are often promoted into incompetency, and this cycle just continues. I just find that many people in the military don't want to give criticism or even receive it. How are people supposed to improve or even be made aware of their failings if they have leaders who are too afraid to upset members of their team by highlighting their shortfalls? We all have them. None of us are perfect, and a good leader takes an interest in the personal and professional growth of their team. But to do this requires some honesty and transparency about people's shortcomings. Facts don't care about your feelings. As key capabilities like the total reward approach come online, these tools can be used to preferentially incentivize high-performing individuals to stay. But this must be accompanied by candidly dealing with low performers, including giving them reduced reward and ultimately encouraging them to leave. At the moment, promotion is almost the only means by which an individual will receive additional reward. The total reward approach and skills-focused career pathways will add new mechanisms. I personally think that this total reward approach would be a great feature which would improve retention in the armed forces. It would make people feel much more valued and incentivize the right behaviours and actions. This image shows an implementation plan in which they set out the timescale for these recommendations to be brought in. They also offer up a few quick wins that could happen. But the question is, will the MOD introduce any of these? I f***ing hope so. I read this whole document and found myself agreeing with 98% of it and the recommendations. They almost seem obvious. The MOD will respond to this review, but as for when is unknown at the moment. Hopefully they won't take as long as they did with Michael Bett's review in 1995. It was 1997 by the time they responded, and 20 years on from that, some of his recommendations were still in the process of being implemented. I don't think the MOD has 20 years to make the changes necessary to keep the armed forces an attractive employer to the up-and-coming generation, and also to retain some of its most experienced and skillful employees. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and got something out of it. Perhaps now you're a bit more informed and understand what could be on the horizon for positive change. Have you read this review? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. If you liked what you just saw, please hit the subscribe button up there, and if you want to see some more videos, click over there. See you soon.